The one above all is entering the cosmic entity war, the thunder war, whatever we want to call it. Storm is the best comic coming out right now, and I don't care what anybody says. So what this does here is this initially picks up in a place whose name I can't pronounce, but it's basically a neutral realm for all pantheons. Now, a lot of these exists within Marvel Comics. Omnipotent City is another example. A lot of you guys are probably familiar with that. For the cosmic entities, basically everybody outside of the one above all, they usually meet in what's called the Far Shore. But the fact is, this huge meeting among all these various gods is actually a meeting among the thunder gods, which includes the newly resurrected Zeus as part of everything that was going on in the Thor mythos and the death of immortal Thor, which sounds like the biggest hypocrisy ever in the history of comic books. But here's the cool thing about this. All these people, all these thunder gods, gods of the storm, are meeting to decide the fate of one person, which is Aurora Monroe. And so following this, what we do is we switch over to the aftermath of the last issue that we covered. Now, the ending of the last issue came out of nowhere, right? That basically what had been going on is that at some point, Eternity had taken possession of Storm's body and transformed her into the Eternal Storm. So she was somewhere in between Captain Universe and the cosmic entity Eternity. And there's a huge range of power between those two beings. So we didn't know exactly where she resided. Ultimately, they kind of went away for a period of time. And then, of course, the FBI was hunting her down because she had helped Professor Xavier escape basically prison in the aftermath of the Fall of X storyline and the end of the Krakoa saga. But then, like, out of nowhere, Galactus's body just came crashing down to Earth, and Infinity tore a hole in reality, presumably having been the one responsible for beating Galactus within an inch of his life, and was on the hunt for her brother, Eternity. And so this is where we pick up. And on the surface, it may seem kind of weird, but the reality here is, like, unlike the way they established in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Galactus in the comics doesn't really care about the goings-on of regular people. And it takes a lot for Galactus to just give a damn about your existence. But Galactus starts to take note of the fight between Storm and Infinity. Now, depending on how old school you are and how much you love cosmic entities, this might rub you the wrong way, but I think I know where Marvel's going with this. And so at the moment, there's three things happening at the same time. The feds are trying to get out of there, right? The one time's trying to get out as fast as they possibly can so they don't get destroyed in the midst of all of this. Gateway, who's basically a teleporter, is teleporting the bodies of Bishop and Manifold to a location where they can basically be healed, because they were ultimately killed by the feds, who were using a mutant that could essentially turn people into living voodoo dolls and then damage those voodoo dolls in the same way that that person would be physically damaged, right? So Bishop's head gets lopped off and Manifold gets cut in half. But Storm is incensed, and this is where things go wild, because as she's fighting Infinity, she says, "I am Aurora Monroe. I share blood with Agamotto, the first Sorcerer Supreme. My roots run deep, far back to Ashtur, the Elder God. All elements are mine to command. I am a goddess." Now, this is one of the elements of Storm's power that you don't really see all that often. Storm does have the ability to manipulate magic. It's been a long-standing part of her mythos, but if you're curious, Mystic Arcana, Sister Grimm #1, it was written by C.B. Cebulski back in 2007 and 2008. That one actually explains how Storm's mystical elements go back to beings like Ashtur. So it's not as though it's being made up here. It's just one of these things where, because Storm's name is Storm, or at least that's the code name she has, more often than not, you see her manipulating the weather because it's just a hallmark of her character. And so magical abilities are there, you just don't really see them all that often. But she says, "Your brother Eternity possessed my body against my will, piloted me till I gave out, made me watch with my own eyes while he decimated my loved ones with my abilities. He made me a pawn in his games, a student of his cruel, idiotic lessons. Tragedy and poverty shredded the clothes on my back into rags. Even then, I would not give in. On the streets of Cairo, when an empty belly pushed me to put aside the morals taught to me by my parents, I trekked back to my mother's village in Kenya until my feet scabbed over. I chose 2,000 miles of treacherous uncertainty rather than remain a pickpocket. I am not a goddess because I hold great power. I am a goddess because nothing and no one controls me. Now, here's the part that might be a little controversial, because Infinity responds to this, and she says, separate one from the other. Is this the ache death and oblivion have endured for all these eons? Without my brother, I can barely keep myself whole. If you have the power to end me, do it. Destruction would mean relief. Now, to the best of my knowledge in Marvel Comics, I am not aware of Infinity and Eternity sharing the kind of link that if one of them is gone for too long, the other starts to weaken. Now, it's entirely possible that in the old Jim Starlin stories, or maybe even the Ron Mars stories from the old Quasar comics, that it's in there somewhere. But if it is, I am not aware of it. And that's kind of the controversial thing, because basically we're getting this kind of idea that Infinity seems to be weaker than she traditionally is. Weak enough for Storm to destroy, which if that's the case, how in the world did Infinity absolutely smack Galactus around like a rag doll? But at the end of the day, Galactus brings the whole conflict to an end because he just says, nothing controls you now, yet you have permitted your emotions to hold sway over you far more than any abstract entity is capable of. So sure, you may say that nothing controls you now, but in fact, it does. Your emotions are controlling you. And that's when she's met with Jaden. Now, Jaden is kind of her ward to a degree, right? The whole storyline with Jaden accidentally killing a whole bunch of people in Oklahoma. Storm has basically brought Jaden in as someone to raise. But it's one of these things where we're kind of getting a mini Kitty Pryde type situation. For those of you guys who are not really familiar with a lot of Storm's history, when Kitty Pryde was introduced into the X-Men, Storm became a kind of surrogate mother for her. And that basically looks like what we're getting here. Hence the reason why she starts crying, because she's overwhelmed by all of this. But in the midst of that, you switch over to all the Thunder Gods, along with Zeus. And he says, enough. All those in favor of this council joining forces with Earth's Storm Mutant to protect this universe, and Beta Ray Bill's the only one who raises his hand. And he says, and all those in favor of the council joining forces with Hadad, the first on his revenge quest against the universe, and all the gods except Beta Ray Bill raise their hands. Now here's one of the things to keep in mind. We don't really know anything about Hadad within Marvel Comics. I mean, there is a version of him that has existed previously, but presumably all that's being retconned. He was a minor god, he was no real challenge to cosmic entities, and certainly nobody like Zeus or anyone like that. But the fact is that Hadad, as he's being presented to us in the Storm comics, is a being so incredibly powerful, the only cosmic entity capable of defeating him was the one above all. So the fact that we're seeing this huge change to presumably his mythos is massive, but it's also why you see these gods basically siding with Hadad. It's better to be the devil's right hand than in his path. And that's where Beta Ray Bill stands up and says, madness, right? Surely you have all gone insane, or have the centuries of excess mead and wine finally taken their toll? And he says, Susanu claimed his legendary blade from the tail of the ferocious eight-headed serpent. Zeus felled the terrible Typhon, and Indra vanquished Vritra. They are not alone in this victory, and many of us have wrestled with Leviathans. The universe made them our mortal foes, made storm gods into dragons so we may better comprehend our enemies. Our purpose is to deliver the universe from the great cosmic Leviathan, Oblivion, not ally ourselves with Hadad and drive all we hold dear back into the void. And so that's when Beta Ray Bill is challenged here. Now, one of the things to know is Beta Ray Bill is essentially taking the place of Thor, because again, immortal Thor has basically been defeated. He's now mortal Thor, just a dude on Earth. So he's not really the Asgardian god anymore. Beta Ray Bill has basically taken his place. And that's where the question's asked, why then did Eternity pass us over only to handpick a mortal as his host, Beta Ray Bill? Why then did the universe choose a weak being as its champion? And it goes on again. We exerted pressure and heat, hoping the carbon would harden into diamond. All she did was crumble like graphite. We will fight alongside Hadad, tear down this faulty universe, and from the ashes, build a new one that is kind, one that is just, one that is ours. So presumably, the gods are kind of pissy because Eternity didn't come to them and instead went to Storm, which makes sense because if you go back and you read the old Jack Kirby Tales of Asgard backup features in the Journey into history of comics, Odin and all those guys are depicted as being very, very petty in terms of how they interact with humanity and even how they interact with each other. So it's not that far beyond the realm of possibility to consider the fact that all these gods are like that. Those who we've seen act that way and those who are being introduced for the very first time. But Beta Ray Bill responds to all of this and he says, why don't I exert pressure and heat on your face so you may have a taste of the fury that you should expect from Asgardian steel and Uru metal if you continue down this path? How many beings derive joy and purpose from their existence? You would snuff them all out because that existence does not please you. But then suddenly he stopped dead in his tracks. And the reason why is because a black winter has emerged. Now, this is one of the big changes that's coming with the Storm comics. In Donny Cates' run on Thor, the Black Winter was presented to us almost kind of like a multiversal Galactus, right? That what the Black Winter did is it traveled the multiverse and consumed whole realities. And in fact, Galactus was seemingly created for the purpose of traveling from one universe to the other in order to basically give the Black Winter a reality to feed on. Now, of course, that flies in the face of decades of continuity in Marvel Comics. And so as you can imagine, once Donny Cates no longer became a writer at Marvel, all that was done away with, right? But the Black Winter is basically being reworked here. There's no longer one singular Black Winter. There's now multiple Black Winters, and they travel the multiverse, consuming whole realities. The difference here is that now they are operating or being made to operate as agents of Hadad. Because what happens is it says, while the storm gods of our universe argued over which side of the Thunder War to join, the Black Winters make the choice for them. And the Winters show up and kill basically every single one of these gods, right? For in the Thunder War, there was only Hadad's side and the side of piled corpses. Hadad is no widowmaker. Hadad is no orphan maker. When Hadad steps into our universe, everyone dies. And it's one of the dopest pictures that I've ever seen, like just a splash page. It looks phenomenal because Hadad is basically the god that all gods fear. And so it's dope to see this because at that point, you switch back over to the Night and Day Hospital for the extra mundane, basically a hospital that specializes in treating the impossible. And you kind of get this bit of a conversation between Gateway and Storm. And it's really fascinating to see this because Storm has been humbled here, right? She says, if I had been much more earnest in my studies with Dr. Voodoo, I would have been able to protect these guys from the mystical attack. If I had accepted help from all those who offered, none of this would have happened. I was just so angry. I didn't want help from anyone who could stop me from taking my revenge the way that I wanted to. But the universe is cruel. It was others who paid for my errors. So the irony about all this is that Storm is not so in control of herself as she would like to believe, and actions have consequences that, right, wrong, or otherwise, her motivations led her down a path where she basically put others in jeopardy or allowed others to be put in jeopardy. She could have accepted aid and ultimately chose not to. And so that's why she says, I am so sorry for the pain my actions have caused you. I am sorry for the irrevocable consequences my deeds have had on our loved ones. But that's where Gateway, ever the philosopher, says the present shapes the future as much as the past shape the present. Shape a better future, Aurora Monroe. Shape a better universe. And so in that moment, we jump to the House of Ideas and we pick up with Eternity approaching the one above all. And he says, the one above all, Father, I have come to bargain for the fate of the universe, Father. And here's the crazy thing about this is that what this does is it zooms out and it shows us everything that is happening here, right? Night and Day Hospital. Oblivion is no more. Eternity has abandoned our universe. Death is death. Her ways have always been beyond our comprehension. Hadad splinters our forces with the Black Winters, forcing the Phoenix to return home to defend the forge of creation and the mutant civilization she houses within it. Because one of the things to keep in mind here is that at the end of the fall of the House of X. Basically, all the mutants on Krakoa that Marvel just didn't want to bring back onto Earth going into the From the Ashes storyline, they just tossed in Krakoa. And Krakoa is in the White Hot Room. So there's literally millions of mutants living there. Marvel's just kind of keeping them over there until such a time as they choose to bring them back. But that's where the Phoenix manifests. And it says, what is decay to rebirth? What is destruction to creation? What is the Black Winter to the Phoenix Force? Because presumably she destroys one of these Black Winters, right? Then you switch to the land of couldn't be, shouldn't be. The Scarlet Witch and her patron entity, the Never Queen, defend the land of possibilities to keep magic and creativity alive. And the Scarlet Witch says, even the abyss is envious of the things I have consumed. In your search for prey, you have found a predator, because the Black Winters are attacking them too. They're going after everyone. And so at that point, you switch back to the far reaches of the universe. And it said, Galactus and I will help Infinity and her avatar, Quasar is back, right? Repel the Black Winters for as long as we can, while you summon all the courage and strength you can muster to face the storm god Hadad alone. Because Storm, by herself, seemingly has to face the one being that defeated the Phoenix Force, Eternity, and all other cosmic entities short of the one above all. Which begs the question, how in the hell is that gonna happen? Because I love Storm. Storm is amazing. Storm's super powerful, but my guy, she ain't a cosmic entity. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, drop a like. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.